The Galactic Federation's outpost on Eridani 4 was a patchwork of steel, glass, and towering alien architecture. The human station there were an anomaly, a last-minute addition to a long-established order. For years, Earth had fought tooth and nail to earn its place in the wider galaxy, but to the aliens on this outpost, the species was still a novelty, fragile, primitive, and barely worth acknowledging. Sergeant James Jim Carter watched the alien workers pass by, their elongated limbs and cybernetic enhancements making them look almost mechanical. His team had been assigned to logistics, moving crates, maintaining supply lines, and ensuring the base functioned smoothly. It was work they could do in their sleep, but the real challenge was enduring the scorn from their so-called allies. The Federation might have welcomed humanity in an official capacity, but here on the ground, it was clear that humans were seen as little more than an afterthought. "Carter, you seeing this?" Corporal Mike Reynolds muttered, tilting his head toward the far side of the depot. Jim followed his gaze. A group of reptilian warriors, their scale bodies gleaming under the artificial light, stood in a loose semicircle, watching something with what could only be described as predatory amusement. The low rumble of their laughter reached Jim's ears as one of them prodded at the subject of their entertainment. A single human stood among them, a woman, silent and still. She was lean, average in height, with short brown hair barely peeking out from beneath her standard-issue cap. Her uniform bore the insignia of logistics personnel, marking her as a supply officer, not a combatant. Unlike Jim's team, who carried themselves with the weight of combat experience, she seemed entirely detached, as though she hadn't noticed the jeering aliens surrounding her. "Who's that?" Jim asked, keeping his voice level. Staff Sergeant Harrison, Lieutenant Daniel Briggs supplied, arms crossed. "Goes by Charlie. She's been here longer than we have. Logistics expert, nothing special." Reynolds scoffed. "Looks like the lizards think she's something special." One of the reptilian warriors stepped closer to her, bearing a mouthful of serrated teeth. His voice carried easily across the depot. "Humans are soft, weak. How do you survive without enhancements?" He tapped the metallic implant embedded in his own temple. "No neural sync, no exoframe, no bio upgrades. It is laughable." Charlie didn't react. Another alien snorted. "This one is female, yes? Is she here to breed more weaklings?" The group erupted in laughter. Jim felt his jaw tighten. His team wasn't new to alien condescension, but there was something particularly grating about this display. The reptilians weren't just mocking her, they were testing boundaries, seeing how far they could push before someone pushed back. To his surprise, Charlie didn't take the bait. She stood motionless, expression unreadable, as though she hadn't even heard them. The aliens weren't used to being ignored. Gunnery Sergeant Luke Maddox shifted beside Jim. "She gonna say something or just stand there?" Before Jim could answer, one of the reptilians reached forward, jabbing a clawed finger toward Charlie's shoulder. She moved. It wasn't much, just a slight shift to the left, so precise that the alien's claw met empty air instead of fabric. The reptilian blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. A flicker of something passed through the group. Uncertainty. Jim exchanged a glance with Briggs. The lieutenant frowned. "She's playing them," Briggs murmured, "letting them think they've got control." Reynolds exhaled sharply. "Hope she knows what she's doing." The reptilian leader sneered. "You do not even defend yourself? Not even a word. What a pathetic species." Charlie finally turned her head, just slightly. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, measured. "Words are for people worth talking to." A heartbeat of silence. Then, without another glance, she stepped past the aliens and walked away, as if they were nothing more than an inconvenient obstacle. The reptilians watched her go, their amusement replaced with something else, something Jim recognized. Discomfort, because they had just been dismissed. Jim let out a low whistle. "Well, damn." Reynolds let out a short laugh. "She's got nerve, I'll give her that." Briggs was less amused. His eyes were locked onto the retreating figure of Charlie, calculating. That wasn't just nerve. That was control. Jim nodded. He'd seen people fold under pressure, crack when pushed too hard. Charlie hadn't folded. She had assessed, adjusted, and dictated the terms of that encounter without lifting a finger. And the aliens had no idea what to make of it. The reptilians regrouped, muttering among themselves. Their leader cast a final glance in Charlie's direction before turning to his companions. "Let us show them what real strength is." Jim heard the unspoken challenge in his tone. This wasn't over. Maddox exhaled through his nose. "They're gonna push harder next time." Jim agreed. But for the first time since arriving on this outpost, he wasn't just thinking about how to manage alien hostility. He was wondering exactly who Charlie Harrison really was. The jungle was alive with movement. Towering trees with bioluminescent veins pulsed faintly, their alien glow casting shifting shadows across the uneven terrain. The air was thick, humid, carrying the scent of damp earth and something metallic, probably the residue of the outpost's atmospheric stabilizers. Sergeant James Carter crouched low behind a ridge, scanning the horizon through the scope of his rifle. He didn't like what he saw. The so-called training exercise had been framed as a friendly competition, a way for the Federation forces to test each other's capabilities in a simulated combat environment. But Carter and his men knew better. The reptilian warriors had orchestrated this as a spectacle, an opportunity to humiliate the humans in front of the entire outpost. What was supposed to be a controlled engagement had quickly turned into something far more dangerous. Their team had been dropped into the dense jungle an hour ago, with limited gear and no real briefing. The alien warriors, however, had come prepared. Advanced drones skimmed through the trees, scanning for movement, while cloaked snipers positioned themselves at high vantage points, waiting for an opportunity to strike. Carter's team had already lost comms, jammed the moment they hit the ground. "Movement 20 meters ahead," Lieutenant Briggs whispered. His voice was steady, but Carter caught the tension in it. He wasn't the only one who knew they were being hunted. "Reynolds, status on the signal disruption?" Carter asked. The corporal was hunched over a small, jury-rigged device, fingers moving swiftly across its controls. "Still jammed. Whatever tech they're using, it's more advanced than what we've seen before. I need more time." Time was exactly what they didn't have. A sharp crack split the air, and a projectile embedded itself in the tree beside Maddox's head. The gunnery sergeant didn't flinch. "Sniper. West quadrant. Elevation 6 meters, Maddox muttered. Briggs had his rifle up in an instant, eyes scanning the tree line. "I don't see a damn thing." That was the problem. The aliens had the advantage. Superior technology, battlefield control, and the confidence that came from knowing their prey had nowhere to run. The humans were being boxed in, forced to play a game they hadn't agreed to. And yet, Charlie Harrison looked completely at ease. She knelt beside a fallen log, adjusting the sights on a sleek, unfamiliar rifle. Carter recognized it, one of the rail rifles issued to high-tier Federation marksmen. He hadn't seen her carrying it before. "You plan on using that, Sergeant?" he asked. Charlie didn't look up. "Already am." A fraction of a second later, she fired. A dull, concussive thump echoed through the jungle. Carter tracked the shot, but it wasn't until he saw the body drop from a camouflaged perch in the distance that he realized what had happened. One shot. Clean. No hesitation. The silence that followed was almost tangible. Briggs exhaled. "Holy hell." Charlie shifted slightly, recalibrating her scope. "That's one." The reptilian forces had made a critical mistake. They assumed the humans were weak because they lacked enhancements. They assumed that brute strength and superior technology were all that mattered. But Carter knew better. Humanity's greatest strength had always been its ability to adapt. Charlie was proving that now. Another shot rang out. Another enemy down. Carter had seen good marksmen before. Hell, he'd trained them. But this was something else. Charlie wasn't just shooting. She was predicting. Calculating. The way she moved, the way she handled the rifle, it was surgical. Efficient. "Who the hell are you, Harrison?" Maddox muttered, voicing what they were all thinking. She didn't answer. More movement. The aliens had realized what was happening. Their formation shifted, repositioning to counter the sudden threat. "They're regrouping," Briggs said. Charlie exhaled slowly. "Let them." The reptilians moved with practiced precision, attempting to flush the humans out of their cover. One of them, a hulking brute nearly 8 feet tall, broke ahead of the others, plasma weapon raised. Before he could fire, Charlie put a round through his visor. He collapsed instantly. The remaining warriors hesitated. They were starting to understand. Carter took the opening. Reynolds now. The corporal slammed a fist against his makeshift device. A burst of static crackled through their earpieces before the comms finally came back online. "Signal's ours again," Reynolds confirmed. Carter activated his transmitter. "Command, this is Alpha Team. We are under live fire conditions. Repeat, live fire. Requesting immediate override on this exercise." The reply came quickly, but it wasn't what he wanted to hear. "Alpha Team, stand by. Override request denied." Carter's jaw clenched. "What?" "Orders from Federation Command. Exercise parameters remain unchanged." Maddox cursed under his breath. "They're leaving us out here." Carter wasn't surprised. This had never been a simple training exercise. This had been a test, a way for the Federation to measure how humanity responded under pressure. Fine. If they wanted a test, they'd get one. "All right," Carter said. "We do this our way." Briggs adjusted his rifle. "Tactics." Carter turned to Charlie. She had already anticipated the question. "They expect us to stay defensive," she said. "We don't. We take control. Force them to react to us." Her voice was calm, clinical. No hesitation. No wasted words. Carter nodded. "Briggs, Maddox, you're with me. Reynolds, keep comms online. Charlie," he hesitated. "You good?" Charlie tilted her head slightly, expression unreadable. "This is what I do, Sergeant." And somehow, Carter believed her. The jungle had turned against its hunters. The reptilian warriors who had once stalked with confidence now moved with caution, their aggression tempered by something they had never expected: fear. It lingered in the humid air, seeping into their movements, slowing their advance. Sergeant James Carter watched from his vantage point, perched on a thick branch high above the forest floor. The aliens were good, better trained and better equipped than most enemies he'd faced, but they had made a fundamental mistake. They had assumed control was theirs by right. That illusion had been shattered the moment Charlie Harrison started shooting. She was somewhere ahead, invisible among the foliage, watching as their prey adjusted to the new reality. The reptiles weren't just hunting anymore, they were reacting. And that meant they were vulnerable. "Briggs, Maddox, flank left. Keep them corralled." Carter's voice was low, precise. "Reynolds, disrupt their tracking. I want them blind." A faint click came through his earpiece. Confirmation. Below, the reptilians spread out, their formation shifting, searching for a way to reclaim dominance. Their leader, a scarred veteran with a jagged crest running down his spine, barked orders in a guttural dialect. The humans weren't supposed to be a threat. This was supposed to be a lesson, a reminder of their place in the hierarchy. That lesson had been rewritten. Carter exhaled, adjusting his grip on his rifle. Their advantage wasn't in firepower or technology. It was in adaptability, in the willingness to abandon a losing strategy and create a new one on the fly. The aliens followed doctrine, relied on their tools. The humans became their environment. A low thrumming sound pulsed through the trees as Reynolds activated his modified jammer. The enemy drones, once sweeping the jungle with cold efficiency, faltered. Some spun aimlessly, their sensors scrambled. Others dropped from the air, crashing into the undergrowth. Disorientation rippled through the enemy lines. Carter took the shot. The first reptilian dropped without a sound, a clean hole punched through its helmet. Briggs and Maddox moved in tandem, shifting positions before the others could respond. Muzzle flashes flared through the trees, and another warrior fell. The aliens scrambled for cover, but there was none. Every piece of the battlefield that had once belonged to them had been repurposed against them. Carter saw the moment they realized it. They were outmatched. Charlie's next shot ripped through the skull of the reptilian commander. The body crumpled, lifeless. For the first time since the battle began, the remaining warriors hesitated. Carter didn't give them time to recover. Advance. His team moved as one. Shadows in the undergrowth, unseen ghosts in a war the aliens no longer controlled. The enemy tried to rally, tried to form a line, but it was futile. Every attempt was met with gunfire, with silence, with the quiet certainty that they were losing not just a battle, but an understanding of their place in the galaxy. One by one, the reptilians fell. By the time the last shot was fired, the jungle had gone still. Carter scanned the battlefield, his heartbeat steady. He wasn't surprised by the outcome, but he took no satisfaction in it. This had never been a game, no matter what the Federation or the aliens had believed. Charlie emerged from the shadows, rifle lowered. Her expression was unreadable, her presence as quiet and unassuming as it had been when the aliens first mocked her. But now there was something else. Recognition. Carter met her gaze. "That's what you do, huh?" She nodded once. Yes. And that was all that needed to be said. The aftermath was quiet. Not the kind of silence that came after a battle, thick with the weight of the dead, but something colder. Calculated. The Federation forces had watched everything unfold from their secure command centers, yet no immediate orders came through the comms. No debrief. No retrieval. They were letting the dust settle, watching to see what the humans would do next. Sergeant James Carter stood among the bodies, rifle at his side, scanning the jungle for movement. The alien corpses lay sprawled across the uneven terrain, their once proud armor dented, scorched, and punctured. The Federation had sent them into this exercise, expecting a display of dominance. Instead, they had been handed a lesson in consequence. A faint rustling signaled Charlie Harrison's approach. She stepped over a fallen branch, her posture as relaxed as it had been before the first shot was ever fired. There was no rush in her movements, no tension. Just the same unshakable presence Carter had come to recognize. "You ever gonna tell me where you learned to shoot like that?" he asked, watching her rifle as she slung it over her shoulder. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she crouched beside the reptilian commander's body, inspecting the fallen warrior with the same detached precision she'd used to dismantle their entire strategy. Her fingers brushed against the jagged crest along his skull before she finally responded. "I've been in wars no one talks about," she said. Carter frowned. That wasn't an answer, not really, but it told him enough. The kind of skill she had wasn't learned in a training program or on a Federation-sponsored battlefield. It was built through something older, something harder. Experience earned in the kind of conflicts that didn't make it into official records. Briggs approached from the left, weapon still in hand. His expression was unreadable, but Carter saw the gears turning behind his eyes. "Command's been quiet," he noted. "They're thinking," Carter said. Maddox exhaled sharply. "More like recalibrating. They expected us to lose. Now they're figuring out how to spin this." He wasn't wrong. The Federation had orchestrated this to prove a point. That humans, for all their stubbornness, were still just another species to be categorized, assessed, and contained within the galactic order. But the moment those first shots were fired, that narrative had started unraveling. Reynolds finally re-established full comms, and the first transmission came through, sterile and detached, as if read from a script. "Alpha Team, return to base. Debrief in 1 hour." No acknowledgement of what had happened. No commendation. Just a summons. Carter exchanged a glance with Briggs before responding. "Copy that." The trek back to the outpost was slow. Not because of fatigue, but because none of them were in a hurry to step back into the artificial order the Federation had constructed. The jungle still belonged to them in a way the outpost never would. It was theirs because they had taken it, shaped it, and turned it against those who believed it was just another tool at their disposal. By the time they reached the perimeter, a contingent of security personnel was already waiting. Alien and human alike, their weapons holstered but their presence unmistakably pointed. Carter had seen this before, damage control. A show of authority after authority had been lost. A high-ranking Federation officer, his uniform crisp and adorned with meaningless commendations, stepped forward. His expression was neutral, but Carter saw the calculation behind his eyes. "You exceeded expectations," the officer said, as if reading from a report. Carter said nothing. The officer shifted his gaze to Charlie. "Your record is incomplete. That will need to be corrected." Charlie met his stare, without reaction. "It won't be." A flicker of something passed through the officer's expression. Annoyance? Discomfort? It was hard to tell, and it didn't matter. Whatever leverage he thought he had didn't exist. You'll be given new assignments, he said instead. You've demonstrated capabilities that require reassessment. Carter didn't like the sound of that. Reassessment was just another word for control. They'd proven something the Federation wasn't ready to acknowledge, and now the higher-ups were scrambling to fit that revelation into their established order. Maddox stepped closer. And if we say no? The officer barely reacted. Then you will be replaced. Silence. Carter weighed their options. Defiance here and now would accomplish nothing, but compliance without question wasn't an option either. Charlie broke the silence first. Send us where you want. The officer nodded, satisfied. But don't make the mistake of thinking you own us, she continued, voice calm. We decide what happens when we get there. The officer's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He simply turned on his heel and walked away. As the team moved past the perimeter, back into the artificial corridors of the outpost, Carter felt the shift. The Federation still thought they controlled the board, but they had underestimated one thing. Humanity never played by the rules.